Now, industry players in the communications industry have welcomed the appointment of Solly Malatsi as the new Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies. The Communications Workers Union is calling on Malatsi to prioritise a bailout for the public broadcaster, the SABC. At the same time, the Southern African Communications Industries Association believes Malatsi's youthfulness will bring a new perspective to the portfolio. Let's bring in Executive Director of the Southern African Communications Industries Association, Kevan Jones, who joins us now. A very good evening to you, Kevan. Thank you so much for your time. He essentially becomes the department's 17th minister in this portfolio since 1994 and its 5th since 2018. What is your reaction to his appointment? I mean, you mentioned the element of youth, which is much needed as we look at the time we're in the face of AI and advancing technology.
Good evening, and you're quite right. I think the fact that he's young and a fresh face, in the department certainly bodes well. I think he'll bring with him an enthusiasm for the job. We've simply had too many ministers holding that particular portfolio for an extended period of time. I think this is the 4th or 5th minister since Cyril Ramaphosa came into power, and so in reality what we're looking for is some continuity of leadership within the department, and I am hopeful, we are hopeful, that that's one of the things that he'll bring. Of course, he grew up in an environment where digital technology already existed, and so I think he's one step ahead of most of the other people that have filled that role in the past.
With this being a department charged with driving the ICT agenda as well as the development of the digital economy, what do you think are some of the priority focus areas that he'll need to look into as he gets working?
So for me, the biggest challenge revolves around the future of the SABC. I think one of the biggest challenges revolves around the funding model, the business model that exists in a broadcast environment where the SABC has a public service mandate. It's incredibly difficult to get into a situation where it can operate on a commercial basis when it has public service objectives that it is required to abide by. And so I think one of the biggest challenges will be to look at the SABC as a business model and try to figure out how it can be funded more effectively than it is being at the moment. I think it's grossly unfair that you impose a public service mandate on the broadcaster and then expect them to generate a profit and sustain themselves. It just can't be done. Yeah. It's a bit like trying to run a road race with your shoelaces tied together. So that would certainly be one of the biggest challenges. And then I think the other thing that is important to me revolves around the cooperation and collaboration with other government departments. So whilst broadcasting falls under or broadcasting and digital transmission falls under the Department of Communications, content creation falls under the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. So absolutely creating an opportunity for cooperation and collaboration between those two departments is going to be a key element for the new minister.
What about some expectations in terms of significant policy changes? I mean, as we really hone in on what would need to be done in terms of rewriting some of the ICT laws, including the Electronic Communications Act and the Broadcasting Act, of course, taking into account the huge changes that have occurred in the sector over the past 15 years or so?
So I think the biggest challenge there revolves around the digital television transmission DTT rollout. Yeah. We've already seen kind of a switch over from analog to digital. As far as I'm aware, all of the analog transmitters operating in the bandwidth greater than 700 megahertz have already been switched off. And so we've seen this this transition from analog to digital terrestrial. But in reality, this was a strategy that was developed 18 years ago, and it probably makes sense to review it and to consider transitioning from digital terrestrial through to digital satellite. But I don't think much in the short term is going to change from a policy perspective. I think that what is likely to happen is that there'll be a series of conversations between the new minister, his department, various industry stakeholders. I'm hoping that with the new broom will come an opportunity for industry to engage more actively with the department. And I'm hoping that they'll be open to fresh ideas and new technologies that can be implemented. But I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a policy change in the short term.
Yeah, because completing the digital migration project is definitely something a dozen ANC ministers have been unable to do, which I think perhaps even includes deciding on what would need to be done. Do you think that perhaps a decision on whether scrapping the project altogether or leaving it to the market to decide which technologies work best for serving South African television consumers, do you think that that kind of discussion could be something that could be looked into as we, look at some of the big challenges with the space and what the minister can do?
Yes, I'm sure that that's one of the things that's going to have to happen. The reality is that this is not a decision that can be imposed upon the market. It's a decision that needs to be reached based on input from the market, a detailed review of the new technologies that are available and that are likely to be rolled out over the coming decade. As I said earlier, the transition from analog to digital terrestrial was a decision based on the technology that was available 20 years ago. Technology has changed fundamentally. The broadcast industry has changed fundamentally. And so the next question is, if we're going to move away from digital terrestrial, what are we going to go with? Digital satellite and streaming services are the obvious solution.
I suppose that conversation also expands on trying now to figure out the role of the state-owned broadcasting signal distributor, Centec. I mean, what happens to Centec as we talk about these changes and the transition? I mean, we can also ask about the relevance in terms of transitioning as we also look at crisis areas like the South African Post Office and Post Bank, which also speak to moving technologies and advances and a system, or perhaps that also needs to change with the changing times.
Yes, and I think that's the point, is that, the post office was established at a time when people were sending out mail, businesses were sending out invoices and statements on an ongoing basis. Those sort of things don't happen any longer, and one of the questions that you have to ask is, what is the future of the post office when there are viable alternatives available for things like parcel delivery? But this is not a problem that's unique to South Africa. Even in Europe and across the UK, we've seen demands placed upon the postal service. And I heard recently that actually the Royal Mail in Britain was up for sale. They too have seen a huge decrease in the level of mail that is distributed through the Royal Mail. We've seen it in South Africa. This is a global challenge, and I think that the nature of the postal services, the nature of organizations like Centec that are focused on signal distribution using a terrestrial network of transmitters. Actually, one of the questions that we have to ask is, what role do they play going forward?
Yeah.
And are they relevant? I'm not going to go onto television and answer that question, but it is absolutely a question that they need to be asking themselves. How can they communicate with the market? How can they add value? What role do they play? And if they aren't playing a meaningful role, it's time to close them down.
Yeah.
I think that this is. I'm hoping that one of the things that will happen with our new minister is that he will make decisions quickly and implement them effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on the conversation there. Executive Director of the Southern African Communications Industries Association, Kevan Jones, speaking there about some expectations and hopes with the new Minister of Communications, Solly Malatsi, taking on the role.